Whose car is this? Step away, hands in the air. Mine. My hands are up, I'm no threat. Shut up! CTV is recording this, the whole world will see!
At a premium EV charging station on the edge of the business district, a self-made millionaire pulled up to charge his luxury sports car after a long day of closing deals. What began as a routine stop, 2 minutes, plug in, check his phone, turned into a confrontation captured on CCTV at exactly 16:45:30. The officer who approached him didn't ask a question. He pointed. He ordered. And he assumed, without a single piece of evidence, that the man standing beside that red sports car couldn't possibly own it. Within minutes, that assumption would trigger one of the largest civil rights lawsuits in the state's history. $800 million. Before we go any further, drop a comment and tell us where in the world you're watching from. And make sure you subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you do not want to miss. The dashcam that captured the opening seconds of the encounter belonged to Officer Reuben Shanks, an 11-year veteran of the department, decorated twice for what his superiors called proactive interdiction. It was a phrase Shanks used often, a polished term for a simple habit, scanning the road for drivers he felt didn't belong in the cars they were driving or the neighborhoods they were driving through. That evening, Shanks was running his usual circuit along the commercial strip near Harlow Avenue, windows cracked, eyes moving from lane to lane with the focused calm of a man who had done this 1,000 times. As his cruiser rolled past the charging station entrance, he eased off the gas. His gaze had already found the car at Bay 3. Custom red luxury sports car, low and gleaming under the dusk light, plugged into the charging column like it owned the space. Shanks' hands tightened on the wheel. He turned in. The man beside the car was David Davidson, 29 years old, first-generation wealth, the kind of man whose name appeared on term sheets and building deeds, not police reports. He wasn't in a boardroom right now. He wasn't on a call. He was standing at Bay 3 in a dark green tailored suit, his phone face down on the roof of the car, watching the charging indicator tick upward with the quiet patience of someone accustomed to waiting for things he'd already earned. He didn't notice the cruiser until it swung wide and parked at an angle across the bay exit, not in a spot, not at a distance, but flush against the front of his car, blocking it entirely. Davidson looked up. His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. Shanks stepped out of the cruiser the way men do when they believe they've already won, slow, squared up, one hand resting on his belt. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't ask what Davidson was doing. He didn't look at the charging cable, the charging screen, or anything that might suggest context. He looked at the car. He circled it, unhurried, deliberate, running his eyes along the body like he was cataloguing damage on an impound lot. Then he stopped, and he pointed. "Sir, step away from the vehicle." Davidson blinked, not in fear, but in the quiet recognition of a man who has been here before. Not here, not at this charging station, but here, this version of here that black men in expensive things know by instinct. He stepped back from the car, hands rising slowly, steady, controlled. "Is there a problem, officer?" Shanks didn't answer. He moved closer to the car, pressing his palm flat against the hood, checking for engine heat, as if Davidson had just abandoned it. Then he crouched to scan the plates from below. Davidson watched him from a few feet away, hands still partially raised, his jaw set. "Keep your hands where I can see them," Shanks said, louder now, straightening up. "We've had reports of a vehicle matching this description, possibly stolen." Davidson exhaled through his nose. Slowly, "This vehicle. Where'd you get this car?" The question didn't come with curiosity. It came with a conclusion already attached, the kind that had been formed the moment Shanks saw the car and the man beside it and decided the math didn't work. Davidson recognized the tone the way you recognize weather. He'd grown up reading it. He answered anyway. "I purchased it 2 years ago, registered in my name. Insurance is in the glove box." "Is that right?" Shanks tilted his head. Not a question, a performance of skepticism. "Mind if I take a look?" Davidson's posture stiffened, barely, but it was there. "Do you have probable cause to search my vehicle?" Shanks almost smiled. "Yeah, you're standing next to a car I've got reason to believe isn't yours." Davidson uncrossed his arms. He did not raise his voice. He did not step forward. He simply stood shoulders back, hands visible, eyes level, and held the moment the way a man holds ground he knows is his. Around them, the charging station hummed. A man at Bay 6 had stopped moving. A woman near the entrance had her phone out. The CCTV overhead recorded everything in silence, timestamp ticking forward, indifferent and exact. "I'm going to need your identification. Now," Shanks said, closing the distance between them. "I'm not refusing," Davidson replied, reaching carefully for his inside jacket pocket. "I'm cooperating, but I'd like to know the legal basis for this stop." "Because," Shanks said, "this vehicle was reported stolen 12 minutes ago." Davidson's eyes narrowed. He knew that was impossible. He had driven directly from his building's private garage, valets on record, security footage timestamped. Who filed the report? Shanks didn't answer. Instead, he moved to the car door and gripped the handle, pulling it once then again when it didn't open. Unlock the vehicle. No, Davidson said quietly, you don't have the right to search it. The word landed like a stone on still water. Shanks turned fully toward him, his chin lifted, his shoulders squared. The hand that had been resting on his belt drifted lower, not touching his holster, but close enough that the message was deliberate. The kind of move that wasn't trained out of officers like Shanks, the kind that was quietly trained in. Davidson didn't step back. He held Shanks' stare with the focused stillness of a man who understood exactly what was happening and had already decided how it was going to end. Not here, beside this car in this lot. In court, in filings. In a number so large it would force an entire department to look at what it had allowed one officer to do for 11 years without consequence. The overhead lights buzzed, Bay 3 hummed. A second set of blue and red lights swept the entrance of the charging station. Backup had arrived. And the CCTV timestamp read, 16:47:14. Reuben Shanks had been on the force for 11 years, long enough to collect 2 commendations, 1 department citation, and a reputation among his supervisors as the kind of officer who didn't wait for crime to come to him. His performance reviews used words like initiative and instinct. His sergeant had once written, in an official evaluation, that Shanks possessed an uncommon ability to identify suspicious activity before it escalated. The department called it proactive interdiction. Shanks called it reading the street. What the performance reviews didn't mention, what the commendations didn't reflect, were the 23 complaints filed against him over the same 11 years. 23 separate incidents. Drivers pulled over without cause. Men asked to step out of vehicles they legally owned. Searches requested without probable cause, sometimes without asking at all. 19 of those 23 complaints had been filed by Black or Latino drivers. None had resulted in formal discipline. Most had been closed within weeks, marked, reviewed, and unsubstantiated, and filed away in a drawer that nobody opened unless a lawyer asked them to. That evening, Shanks was running his standard circuit along Harlow Avenue, the commercial stretch that fed into the business district, the kind of road where expensive cars moved in and out of parking structures all day without drawing a second glance, unless you were Shanks. He scanned every vehicle the way a customs officer scans luggage, not looking for something specific, but waiting for something to feel wrong. It was, he would later tell investigators, just instinct. He was passing the entrance to the charging station when the red sports car caught his eye. Low, custom, gleaming under the last of the evening light as it turned into Bay 3. He didn't see a businessman finishing his day. He didn't see a legal plate, a charging cable, a man in a tailored suit moving with the quiet ease of someone exactly where he was supposed to be. He just saw the car, and he turned in. David Davidson had not come from money. That was the part that never made the headlines, not the exits, not the portfolio, not the number that his accountants updated quarterly, and that had, by his 29th birthday, crossed $200 million. What came before all of that was a 1-bedroom apartment in the east side of the city, a mother who worked 2 jobs, and a teenager who taught himself to code on a library computer because there wasn't one at home. He had built his first company at 22, sold it at 25, and used every dollar of that exit to fund the real estate holdings that now bore his name on the side of 3 buildings downtown. He had done it without a safety net, without a legacy admission, without anyone who could make a call on his behalf. He had done it the only way available to him, completely and alone. He wasn't thinking about any of that at 5:45 p.m., standing at Bay 3 of the Harlow Avenue charging station. He was thinking about the 6 p.m. board call he needed to be presentable for, and whether the 40 minutes on the charger would be enough to get him through the evening. His dark green suit was still sharp from the morning. He moved through the world that way, assembled, deliberate. He plugged the cable in with the practiced ease of routine, set his phone face up on the roof of the car, and scrolled through a chain of emails his assistant had flagged as time-sensitive. The charging station was quiet at this hour. A few other bays occupied, the low hum of current moving through cables, the last of the dusk light turning the red of his car into something close to copper. Davidson was already composing a reply in his head when the light changed. Not the sky, the bay. A wash of blue and red swept across the hood of his car, sharp and sudden, the way lights announce themselves when they want to be felt. He looked up. Shanks took his time getting out of the cruiser. That was the first thing the CCTV captured, not urgency, not the controlled efficiency of an officer responding to a genuine threat, but a slow, deliberate exit. One hand on the door frame. A long look at the car before his boots hit the pavement. The body language of a man who had already decided what he was looking at and was simply taking his time arriving at the conclusion. He didn't identify himself. He didn't state a reason for the stop. He didn't ask a question. He pointed, index finger extended toward Davidson like a thing being catalogued, and he said it with the flat authority of someone who had never been told no. "Sir, step away from the vehicle." Davidson's phone was still in his hand. He set it on the roof of the car carefully without being asked, and he stepped back. His hands came up the way they did when a man has learned that keeping them visible is not a gesture of guilt but of survival. Palms out, fingers spread, elbows level with his shoulders. The motion was too practiced to be panic. It was something older than that. Something installed over years of understanding exactly what the world required of him in moments like this one. The CCTV caught his face at Suxdun, futty-fuv-futty-ta, 12 seconds into the encounter. He wasn't afraid, or if he was, it had already been folded inward and pressed flat beneath the composure he wore the way other men wore armor. What the camera captured instead was awareness. A man taking in every detail of what was happening, cataloguing it, already understanding what it was even before it had fully revealed itself. He had never been to this charging station before. He had never met Rubun Shanks. But he had been here in the texture of this moment, in the specific weight of being looked at that way, more times than he could count. He knew exactly where this road went. He kept his hands up and said nothing. Shanks moved around the car the way investigators move around a crime scene, slowly, with the performance of someone who needed the watching world to believe he had already found something. He dragged his eyes along the body panels, crouched briefly to examine the rear plate, then straightened and pressed his palm flat against the hood, feeling for heat. As though Davidson had just abandoned the vehicle minutes ago rather than driven it legally from a private garage across town. It was thutter. Careful, practiced thutter, and the CCTV recorded every frame of it. Davidson's hands were still raised. His voice, when he finally spoke, was level and precise, the way a man speaks when he understands that tone is the only thing he can control right now. "Can you tell me the legal basis for this stop?" Shanks didn't look at him. He uncluppered his radio. "Dispatch, this is Shanks, badge 4471. I'm at the Harlow Avenue charging station, Bay 3. Got a possible stolen vehicle, red luxury sports car, running plates now." He read the plate number slowly, deliberately, and waited. The plates came back clean in under 40 seconds. They always were going to. The registration was current, the title unencumbered, the insurance active, everything exactly as it should be for a car purchased outright and maintained without incident for 2 years. The radio confirmed it without ceremony. Shanks heard it. He clipped the radio back to his belt without acknowledging the response and turned his attention back to the car, as though the answer had said something different. At Bay 5, a woman in a grey blazer had stopped moving entirely, her charging cable held midair. At Bay 2, a man in his 40s had his phone raised, not obviously, not confrontationally, but up, recording. Across the lot, the station attendant had appeared in the doorway, shoulder pressed against the glass, watching. Shanks noticed none of them. Or he noticed all of them and didn't care. With officers like Shanks, it was sometimes impossible to tell the difference. The second cruiser came in fast, cutting across the entrance of the charging station with its lights still rolling, and pulled up at an angle beside Shanks' vehicle. The officer who stepped out was younger, mid-30s, clean uniform, the careful posture of someone who still believed that showing up decisively was the same thing as showing up correctly. His name was Officer Brett Calloway. He had been on the force for 4 years. He took one look at the scene and his hand moved to his belt. What he saw was this: a calm man in a tailored suit, hands raised, standing beside a spotless red luxury car at a charging station, in full public view, with no weapon, no threat, no flight risk, and no evidence of any crime in progress. He saw Shanks circling the vehicle with the energy of a man who had already written the report in his head. He saw a small crowd of bystanders who had stopped pretending not to watch. He sided with Shanks. He didn't ask questions. He didn't request a briefing or review the plate results already sitting clean on Shanks' dashboard terminal. He moved to the opposite side of Davidson and mirrored Shanks' posture, shoulders back, hand resting on his equipment, close enough to close distance in a second. The blue wall didn't announce itself. It never did. It simply appeared, the way it always had, assembled not from malice, but from the practiced instinct of men who defaulted to each other before they defaulted to the evidence in front of them. Davidson's hands were still raised. They had been raised for 6 minutes now. His arms had begun to ache in the way arms do when held above the head for reasons that have nothing to do with choice. He didn't lower them. Shanks stepped forward and reached for his restraints. The woman at Bay 6 stopped recording and took a step back. The charging station went completely silent. Even the hum of the cables seemed to drop. What happened next lasted 4 seconds. The CCTV timestamp would later confirm it, 16:51:08 to 16:51:12, 4 seconds that every journalist, every attorney, and every member of the Oversight Committee would watch on loop in the weeks that followed, because in those 4 seconds, everything shifted. Davidson didn't reach for his wallet, he didn't plead, he didn't look at Shanks. He turned his head slowly, deliberately, and looked directly into the CCTV camera mounted on the column above Bay 3, the way a man looks at the one witness in the room he knows he can trust. And he spoke. Not loudly, not with the cracked edge of someone afraid or the raised pitch of someone performing. He spoke the way he closed deals. Level, certain, final. My name is David Davidson, I own this car. A beat, just long enough for the words to land and settle. And I'm about to own this department. Shanks' hands stopped moving. The restraints stayed on his belt. Something crossed his face that the camera caught but couldn't name, not quite recognition, not quite doubt, but the first fracture in the certainty he had carried into the charging station 14 minutes earlier. He stood still the way men stand still when the ground has shifted beneath them, and they haven't yet decided whether to admit it. Calloway took a single step back, not a retreat, small enough to be deniable, but it was there. The CCTV caught that too. Neither officer spoke. The crowd at the edge of the bay held its position. 3 phones were recording now, held low but steady, capturing angles the CCTV couldn't reach. Davidson kept his eyes on the camera for 1 more second, unhurried, unblinking, and then lowered his gaze back to Shanks. His hands were still raised. He hadn't moved from the spot where he'd been standing for the last 9 minutes. The charging station hummed on, indifferent and exact. Supervising Sergeant Diana Torres had been 2 blocks away when the call came through, backup requested, possible stolen vehicle, Harlow Avenue charging station. She had been on the force for 16 years. She had worked under 4 different chiefs, survived 2 departmental restructurings, and developed the particular kind of instincts that come not from aggression but from accumulated experience. She pulled into the charging station at 16:52:34 and took in the scene in under 5 seconds. She ran the plates before she got out of the car. The result came back in 89 seconds. Clean title, legal registration, full and uncontested ownership under the name David Davidson, current address, no flags, no holds, no reports, stolen or otherwise, filed against the vehicle at any point in its registration history. She sat with that information for exactly 1 moment, then she stepped out. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't make a production of it. She walked directly to Shanks, said something to him in a tone too low for the bystander recordings to capture, and placed a hand briefly on his arm, not gently, but with the firm redirection of someone removing an obstacle from a path. Shanks looked at her, then he looked at the ground. He stepped back from Davidson without another word, and moved toward his cruiser with the slow, diminished walk of a man who understood, on some level, that the ground had fully given way. Calloway was already retreating to his vehicle. Torres turned to Davidson. She said the vehicle was confirmed. She said she was sorry for the delay. The words were careful and insufficient, and they both knew it. Davidson nodded once. He lowered his hands for the first time in 11 minutes. He reached for his phone from the roof of the car, unhurried, the same way he had set it down, and dialed. His attorney answered on the first ring. Davidson turned slightly away from the bay, his voice dropping low and steady, and said 4 words. "Start building the case." The clip went up at 9:04 p.m. 16 seconds of CCTV footage, grainy at the edges, timestamped in the corner, framed through the circular lens of the Bay 3 column camera. A man in a dark green suit, hands raised, an officer pointing, a red luxury car, a second cruiser pulling in behind the first. It wasn't narrated, it wasn't edited. It was simply footage, cold and unadorned, and it moved across the internet the way only true things do, fast, and without needing an explanation. By 11 p.m., it had been shared 40,000 times. By 1 a.m., the number was past 1 million. By 3 a.m., 4.2 million people had watched David Davidson stand with his hands in the air beside a car he owned outright, and the comment sections had already done what comment sections do when something lands in the chest before the mind has time to argue with it. By morning, the journalists had the complaint files. 23 incidents, 11 years. 19 of the 23 complaints filed by Black or Latino drivers, men pulled over on commercial strips, asked to step out of vehicles, subjected to searches that found nothing because there was nothing to find. The complaints had names attached, dates, case numbers, and disposition codes that all read the same way: reviewed, unsubstantiated, closed. Not one had resulted in formal discipline. Not one had cost Shanks a shift, a commendation, or a line on his performance review. The pattern had always been there. It existed in ink, in filing cabinets, in a database that any internal affairs investigator could have accessed on any afternoon for the past decade. It wasn't hidden. It was simply never treated as something that added up to anything. Each complaint isolated, each one reviewed alone, each one quietly shelved before the next one arrived to sit beside it. The camera didn't create the pattern. It just made it impossible to look at one complaint at a time anymore. The filing came 11 days after the footage went viral. $800 million. Civil rights violations, unlawful detention, fabrication of a police report, and a pattern of racially motivated enforcement. The lawsuit documented across 19 separate prior incidents, each one named, dated, and attached as an exhibit. It was one of the largest civil rights suits filed against a municipal department in the state's history, and the number was not accidental. Davidson's legal team had chosen it the way you choose a language, deliberately, for what it communicates to people who only listen when the figure is large enough to threaten something they care about. The department's attorneys requested a copy of the CCTV footage on the morning the lawsuit was filed. They watched it once. By afternoon, they had begun drafting a settlement offer. Shanks was terminated 14 days after the incident, not suspended, not reassigned, not placed on administrative leave with pay while a committee deliberated. Terminated. The 23 complaints that had spent years in a closed filing system were reopened, reviewed collectively for the first time, and entered into the public record. Callaway received a formal reprimand. The department announced a full rewrite of its use of force and investigatory stop policies, effective immediately, with external oversight attached. Davidson closed the $40 million real estate deal 3 days late. His counterparts on the other side of the table had watched the footage. Nobody mentioned it. The deal closed in 40 minutes. He gave one public statement. No press conference, no interview, no televised moment. A single paragraph, released through his attorney's office and posted without comment to his professional profile. I didn't raise my hands because I was guilty. I raised them because I've learned what it costs not to. That ends now. He returned to his office the same afternoon, took the elevator to the 14th floor, sat down at his desk, and went back to work the same way he always had, building something in a world that kept asking him to prove he belonged in it.